Welcome everyone, whether you are on the small screen here or tuning in via the Town of Hillsborough YouTube channel. Welcome to the September 9th meeting of the Mayor's Task Force on Reimagining Public Safety. And we can go ahead and get started with the roll call.
Judith Alvarado. Keith Cook. Ata Bijou.
Here.
Shannon Blue. Patricia Harrison.
Here.
Chloe Johnson.
Here.
Rod Jones. Jason Knapp.
Here.
Tracy Little. Hathaway Pendergrass.
Here.
Hooper Schultz.
Here.
Mark Xavier.
Here.
Allison Zirkle.
Here.
Great, thank you, Eli, and welcome everyone. And I know I just wanted to share that Chief Hampton checked in advance of this meeting just to touch base. He had a scheduled training tonight with his staff and just said he was willing to rearrange things if it seemed like he needed to be here. But my assessment was we were kind of continuing our discussion from last week to finalize the recommendations, and that it was fine for him to go about the work he needed to be doing with his staff. So I just wanted to be sure folks knew that. So it's great to see you all again. Thanks for all of the work that you've been doing since our last meeting. And we'll talk about all that shortly. But before we do that, we have an item for decision here, which is just to approve our minutes from the August meeting. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All right, I'll call that a move by Hathaway and a second by Allison. And we can roll call that vote.
Sujata.
Approved.
Patricia Harrison.
Approved.
Chloe Johnson.
Yes, approved.
Jason Knapp.
Approve.
Hathaway Pendergrass.
Approve.
Hooper Schultz.
Approve.
Mark Xavier.
Approve.
Allison Zirkle.
Approved.
And the minutes are unanimously approved. You know, when this group started meeting, I had this idea we might get to a point where we were in a room together and we didn't have to roll call simple things like minutes, but here we are and we've made it this far. So thank you for your perseverance. It's much appreciated. I know sometimes things like that feel a little bit tedious. Moving on to item number 5, our items for discussion. We're set here with item 5A to finalize recommendations from 2 small groups. If for some reason that doesn't happen tonight, I probably said before, Hillsborough has this ethos of slower, not sometimes faster is slower. So I don't say that to rush things, but feeling like it is, we are in a place where I think we're ready to finalize these and wrap up our work. So moving to, let's bring up the first group, which we've unceremoniously called Group A, with the mental health calls and traffic stops. And I can share the screen. I've got this pulled up with that, if that would be helpful. All right, is that working for folks? Okay, so if I am remembering correctly, and Allison, thank you for sending in those the additional items from your group. we'll go to those next, but if I'm remembering correctly, I believe that there might be a change from that set to go, that you had a change to your drafted mental health recommendations. Is that right?
Yeah, one proposed suggestion was, instead of hiring the social work or similar positions to the police department, to instead add them to be working under the town of Hillsborough, but in collaboration with the police department, which might allow for those positions to kind of work with public safety issues that arise outside of the context of calls to law enforcement, and also without, it might increase the capacity for public trust if the social workers are not tied to working within the police department. So that was some of the thought behind that.
Okay, I'm just going to see if I can, there it is. So all of these will eventually be cleaned up and made to look nice, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. Just this is sort of like a workshop here, so we can work in a document together. So I'm going to read through these again and then see if there are questions, changes, or additional thoughts that come up for people, or if folks are feeling like these are where you want to be. Okay, so the first one in this category of recommended mental health response is to collaborate with other local jurisdictions listed out here to pool funding resources and develop a coordinated countywide mobile mental health crisis response service. This countywide effort should also look at restructuring the 911 call system by either enhancing training for 911 operators so that they can divert mental health crisis calls to non-police behavioral health first responders, or by establishing an alternative emergency number for community members to call in case of a behavioral health crisis. Number 2, increase training. Allocate funding for CIT training, crisis intervention, so that all officers can be CIT trained. This is already a goal of the HPD. Assure that other first responders are also CIT trained, such as the EMS and fire department. Explore whether additional training could be beneficial depending on what data shows in terms of incidents in our community, such as the intersection of domestic violence and behavioral health, mental health first aid, and to allocate funding for additional training if that's needed.
Can I make a comment
Yes,
about that?
please.
So I was wondering if we could maybe revise just the allocate funding for CIT training, but to just instead say, ensure that all officers are CIT trained, because that's already their goal, and they should already have funding for CIT training. And I think they had shared in an early on presentation that they are required to do a certain amount of training per year. So I've just heard and read that increasing training for law enforcement, while of course is very important, does not necessarily lead to significant differences in racial disparities and outcomes. So I just wanted to bring that up and see if anybody else had any thoughts on that with regards to increasing training. I think exploring other relevant training is important, like related to domestic violence and behavioral health. But I just wanted to be careful about our wording for that.
All right, I see that Hathaway is connecting to audio. I'm not sure if he's just trying to get reconnected or if he has a comment. Allison, as I'm waiting a second for that, I just want to be sure that I'm capturing what you're suggesting correctly. So, because I feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah, that's
what else?
that's
What
right.
else would you like to add? That's right. Okay.
Yeah. So just take out maybe just take out that whole first sentence and say, ensure that all officers are CIT trained, which is already a goal of the Hillsborough Police Department.
Okay. Okay. And just remembering that I can't see all of you at once, feel free, other people, to speak up at any time. Does this seem that do folks feel good about this change and understand what Allison was saying here? I'm seeing a nodding of heads and not hearing anyone protest. All right. Number 3, allocate funding to add a minimum of 1 to 2 social workers to the Hillsborough Police Department. The social work position would serve as a co-responder to crisis calls while also responding to calls without an officer present when safe and appropriate. The position would also focus on preventative and follow-up work, reaching out to community members to assure that they are connected to needed resources. It would serve as a consulting role for the police department with regards to behavioral health, such as mental health, substance abuse, and intellectual developmental disability, to these issues and needs in our community. Lastly, the social work position would review and track crisis response data disaggregated by demographics with a focus on racial disparities, to critically analyze effectiveness of responses and to identify underlying causes of the behavioral health crisis calls, the social determinants of health. And then a revision from that group from last month was to, instead of adding the social work position directly within the police department, have it be housed as part of the town, but outside of the police department, but to collaborate with the department. This may increase capacity to build trust and allow for response to situations in the town that fall outside the realm of law enforcement.
I had a question about this one just for the group. Is this one related to how is this one related to the first recommendation of the mobile mental health crisis unit? Would these social workers be a part of that crisis response? I mean, would we need to have these social workers in order for the first recommendation to work?
So I have 2 responses to that, and then I would love to hear from the group. So my 2 responses are, one of them is pleading a little bit of ignorance, because I feel like something along these lines came up in the last meeting that I can't quite grasp in my memory about talking about 1 and 2 and how they're different. And so I would love to be reminded about that. And I'll put a few notes in so that it's clear, so that there's some way that it's captured. The other thing that I would say is, speaking generally, I think that this group doesn't have to process the exactly how things would work, exactly what is possible, exactly what isn't possible. I think that maybe what would be, because that will have to be kind of thought through by town staff and then the town board as far as budgeting implications go. I think what might be helpful is if, somewhere in the materials that we forward on, if there's just a statement of saying, if there are ways to capture the spirit of these recommendations, but we realize that this might, like I'm thinking about number 3, anytime we hire people, that's, there just might be ways to make it more cost effective if we are doing that in collaboration with other jurisdictions instead of, us doing our own thing. I don't know that that's the answer here. I just want to use that as an example of the kind of things that we'll be thinking of. So is that a helpful or a confusing comment?
May I say something?
Sure.
Yeah. For number 3, is it, so let me try, let's try to get this out of the way first. So the big paragraph was written, right? And then there was an adjustment to what was said above. Am I correct?
Yeah, this was the part I've highlighted is
A
a,
revision, right?
yeah.
Okay, so meaning that, or this, I'm trying to understand this because it seems that everything was everything rejected for what was already said? I'm trying to understand this before I say anything else. You see what I'm saying? Because instead of adding, so number 3 is not really enough. I'm confused.
I'm sorry, Mark. I'm not totally following you. So let me say something and then see if I've totally missed
Okay.
what you're asking, which is nothing here has been accepted or rejected. At the last meeting, the groups came together after meeting separately, and these were the recommendations for mental health crisis response
Correct.
from Group A. And so we talked about those some at the last meeting. And then in the interim, there's been this revision to say, and the preference would be to have these social work positions within, housed within the town, but not within the police department. And so that's the suggested revision to then send as a recommendation to the town board, the town manager, town attorney, chief of police, which is the next phase. Does that answer your question?
Yes. So yes, exactly. So I mean, it's a little bit confusing to. I thought, the persons working in the group would actually remove the whole section and replace it with the revision section. That's, I was kind of confused about that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you see
This
what I'm
part
saying?
still
Because
stays. Yeah.
oh, okay, or highlighted in blue or something. I don't know. So it was kind of confusing to me. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
And just to reiterate, like for the difference between number 3 and number 1 would be that number 1 kind of addresses the deficit of behavioral health crisis response services in the community beyond just Hillsborough. And it's been identified as a gap in Chapel Hill and Carborough also. And given that we're a smaller jurisdiction, collaborating, just completely outside of the realm of law enforcement, collaborating with the other jurisdictions to enhance behavioral health crisis response throughout the county is what that recommendation is getting at. Whereas number 3 is more focused on Hillsborough and our the Hillsborough Police Department's response to local crisis calls, whether they're related to behavioral health or domestic violence or someone who's, experiencing homelessness and that kind of thing. Does that help a little bit?
Yes. That helps me. Chloe, does that help you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. Sorry, I was scrolling up trying to find you. Oh, and I see that Judith is with us as well. Welcome, Judith. I'm glad you joined. Thank you, Allison, again for that explanation. That is very helpful. Oh, and I see you've typed it out in the chat. So I'm gonna, oh, Eli typed that in the chat. Thank you. Okay. I know this looks messy right now, but it's just live editing, good times. Okay. So, are folks feeling square with where this is? Scrolling through, seeing nodding of heads. Great. All right. Well, with all of these, there'll be a cleaned up copy that everyone will see before it goes anywhere else. So then let's move on to the traffic stop. And folks in Group A who worked on the traffic stop topic, would it be best to pull up you think the short version or the long version? Which do you think is the best one to work from here? Maybe I'll make an executive decision, the short version, and then if we need to flip to the explanations, we can go to the long version.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, here we are in the traffic stops. And so you all presented these to us last month and then wanted to talk about them some more and get them a little bit more refined. And so we've got the refined version and I will read through these. Number 1, expand current traffic stop reporting data, expand the current traffic stop reporting data set to include all significant citizen interactions, including but not limited to public complaints, use of force incidents, marijuana arrests, community events, mental health crises, and vehicle pursuits.
Mayor Weaver,
Yes.
I am not seeing the traffic document. I'm not sure about
Oh,
everybody else.
I see. No, I see. I thought I could just flip back and forth between documents, but I can't. So I'm going to stop and then start over. I apologize. Thanks for letting me know.
No problem.
Long version. All right. Now I've lost it altogether. Oh, here it is. Okay. Can folks see it now? Okay. All right, expand the current traffic stop data reporting set to include all significant citizen interactions, including but not limited to public complaints, use of force incidents, marijuana arrests, community events, mental health crises, and vehicle pursuits. And this is per the memorandum of understanding that is aligned with the 2 branches of the NAACP, the one in Chapel Hill, Carborough, and the Northern Orange branch that they've been talking with the law enforcement agencies with. Is that right? Okay. All right. Number 2, make a commitment within the HPD to cease pulling people over using the traffic code as a pretext for suspect criminal behavior. Limit the investigation during a traffic stop to the reason for the stop, with the exception of situations that pose a risk to public safety. Number 3, cease low-level regulatory traffic stops, equipment violations, expired tags, license plate, light out, and broken tail lights. Number 4, implement the use of a written consent card. Stop searches for contraband following traffic stops unless there is an imminent safety risk. Number 5, reallocate funding to develop resources to assist people with fixing minor vehicle maintenance issues, as well as assist with registration and insurance renewal payments for those who meet some criteria. We also recommend that Hillsborough begin contributing support to the Orange County Criminal Justice Debt Fund and expand this fund to include assistance for costs related to vehicle maintenance and registration insurance renewal. Great.
I have can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I have a couple points on here. Number 2, that language, and the full version, I'm not sure who typed, I appreciate the long version too, because it kind of explains. Allison did a good job of putting that together, which helped me because Allison did a lot of work here in terms of creating these, and then doing a lot of background and kind of explaining why. The language though, in number 2, I'm more in line with the idea of having it say make a commitment within within these HPD to not pull people over using the traffic code rather than to cease, because we made an interpretation, and I read the data as well, and I think we've made an interpretation based upon what has occurred, or it's an interpretation of the data that made that to cease versus simply, if we put the language in there, to not do. That's all I want to do in that situation, is just to change that language from to cease to simply just to say to not pull over. Because the to cease implies that we've been doing this. HPD has been doing that. And I saw the data. I think that's an interpretation of that. I think there also could be a different interpretation of that.
Thank you, Hathaway. Is that acceptable to other folks? All right, I'm seeing folks nodding.
And then the other thing I really like, I'll just get to kind of on my point. I like 1, the way that we're doing 2 now, 3, 5. The piece with 4 that's difficult for me to understand, because I think it's kind of broad here, where it says, it's implement use of a written consent card. Then it says stop searches for contraband following traffic stops unless there's an imminent safety risk. I don't know what contraband is, and I know what my definition is. I don't know what anybody else's definition is, and I think that can, and I don't know what necessarily the intent of it was, because if you pull someone over and you see if a gun contraband is a large amount of methamphetamine contraband, and then if it falls under a certain definition, putting this together to say what's an imminent risk, we're using a lot of buzzwords that people have different definitions for. So it always makes me pause when I see that language, because language is really important in these type of in these settings. And the problem is, and I'm not trying to create a problem with it. I just can't think of something to put in place there. I don't want to. The other one, I thought about it, like, oh, let's do this instead of that. And I don't like it when folks say, let's not do that, but then they don't provide a solution. I can't offer a solution, at least at this point. I can't think of it. Maybe I'm missing something. But I think that's too broad. That's what my first inclination is, that, and maybe I'm misreading it.
Yeah, it is really broad, and I can think of many, like there's so many different scenarios that can happen when someone gets pulled over. The most common kind of scenario that I've been thinking of is like someone gets pulled over for some low-level traffic offense, and then the police smells marijuana, and then uses that as probable cause, maybe to search the vehicle, and then finds some small amount of marijuana, and the person gets arrested. That's just one example that this recommendation was kind of getting at, trying to start preventing. But I know there are so many different situations where this is maybe too broad to encompass everything. Someone else had brought up, like, if there's an active warrant, I think that by law, I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, so, but that if there's an active warrant, then that has to be served on the individual. I don't know if that's always the case, because I've heard of people having warrants and they're for lower level, maybe like a failure to appear, they're able to continue on their way. I think this recommendation would maybe warrant a lot, like a more in-depth exploration. And I'm not sure if we would be the ones to do that, but maybe, I don't know, the advisory board that maybe we're going to talk about, model like that could be a project for them, or certainly we
Yeah.
would need lawyer input and that kind of thing.
I'm sorry, Allison, I didn't mean to cut you off. My audio has been going in and out, and so I'm trying not to step on anybody's words. I think that actually might be that's a good idea, to have the next stage of it, kind of do some research on that, or make a more full recommendation. Because in that year one scenario, right? I mean, from my end, from judge's end, we really work hard on what the orders for arrest look like, so we're not arresting people for we're not having people picked up for smaller things. But if there is an order for arrest that's active, it's going to be served, even if you're pulled over for speeding, if it's run and they see it. But and I don't know, and maybe Mayor Weaver, maybe you can ask some clarification. It's hard for me sometimes to take off my the legal hat in certain things, and I don't want to bog anything down. Again, I'm not really going to try to throw just quicksand into this discussion, but I felt like maybe I like that idea of maybe pushing this for that specific type of recommendation to the next committee.
I have a couple of thoughts. One of them, well, this is what I would suggest, which y'all can take or leave, is to actually just keep it simple and recommend, because I think what is important is the reason you're recommending the consent card. I feel like that is what this group has thought about, learned about, and there's a reason that you all are making this recommendation. So my suggestion would be to keep it simple, that this group recommends use of a written consent card with a simple why, to prevent these traffic stops, as a kind of an excuse to seek out other criminal activity, but said more eloquently than that. And
well, the
then
basis behind the consent card I can think of is that it informs individuals of their rights that they have, that they maybe have no idea about.
Yes. So you can keep it that simple. We recommend, so here on the long version, you could just keep it that first sentence. And then you could add some language that, we encourage, or the future advisory board could explore this in more detail. Or it also could be that, and I'm thinking out loud here, obviously, is that one of the things that's great about being a small jurisdiction is that it's a little bit easier for us to be nimble and to try things. And then if they don't seem to be working, try something different. Now, anything that has to do with, entanglement in the criminal justice system, you have to be real careful about that. You can't, it's not the same as some other areas where we just try things, but this may be an ongoing conversation between the HBD and the future advisory board about, what is actually happening to folks. So that's a long way of saying, I think you can still make the recommendation, but acknowledge that a future board might need to think this through in more detail. Because I don't think you need to I don't think you have to remove it from the list altogether. I think that's the other thing. That's the flip side of what I'm really trying to say.
Yeah, I think it goes to what Mary Weaver, you were saying about the spirit of these recommendations and communicating that to the town board. I think it's important to have the background information, and even if some of it isn't clear, that to explain, why we want these recommendations, and hopefully the town board will take them with an open mind, even though a lot of these terms are terms of art and also quite vague, and certainly determining what an imminent safety risk is very subjective, and officers have to do that in sometimes tense, and very quickly they have to make these decisions, and so it's very hard to kind of help parse that, what that would be, or but I think it is important to state, and I don't think anybody's saying that this isn't important, but I do think it's important to state that we do want pretextual stops to not occur, right? And so we're trying to develop policies to help limit those if they are occurring in Hillsborough. So I agree with what you just suggested.
How are other folks feeling? Do you want to keep it on the big list of recommendations that goes forward?
I agree with what Chloe just said. I think that makes sense.
I would also just say, for simplification's sake, the second part of number 4 is pretty much saying the same thing as what number 2 is already recommending. So you could even take that out altogether, because it's already described in number 2.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems to me that with that deletion, and then then you've still left the gist of what you'd like to see happen, and why, and what some of the possible unwanted results could possibly be, and that part we don't know until there's a change to work from.
I'm not trying to slow us down, but I agree that this one is the language we just took out is repetitive of number 2. I think it might be helpful to reference number 2 in this recommendation, just to emphasize that just because we're having consent cards, we don't think that this problem is going to be solved completely. I don't know if that's necessary, but I did like the reference to number 2. I don't necessarily need the language of stopping searches for contraband following traffic stops unless there's an imminent safety risk, but maybe somehow just referencing the recommendation in number 2 as just working in tandem with this recommendation.
All right, Hathaway, I know your audio is going in and out, but do you feel like, does this make you feel more at peace with that one?
So can you scroll back? You might hear some screaming in the background. If that's children, sorry.
It's okay, I have a barking
Oh.
dog.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. I can see 4. And we didn't do anything to 2, did we? I can't remember.
No. We're still, just with number 4.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna leave these notes here, but go back to the short version so we can see that and see if there's other things people want to respond to. Okay.
And Mayor Weaver, looking at the way that this is written, because I know it's a little bit hard because the short version, the full version gives us like a full kind of, description of everything. Hold on. But number two, that last sentence, that limit the investigation during traffic stop to the reason for the stop. That it sounds like when I looked at it again, it's like another way of saying what we said earlier in terms of limit it. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna I'm gonna have to mute myself.
It's totally fine.
I'm just pointing ourselves to the second sentence in number two.
So Hathaway, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. I know you have a lot going on. But I think the agreement was, yes, that was very similar to number two. So not to have that precise same language, but to have some reference to know that consent cards don't solve everything. And because the real worry is what happens with number two. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what your last concern was, but I think maybe it was. So when you have the opportunity, you can chime back in if we're not quite there. Okay, other questions, comments, or things that need to be addressed with this list? Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that we reviewed number 6. It's pretty straightforward, but I don't know if that one.
Oh, sorry, I did not scroll down all the way. Cease regulatory checkpoints altogether. Which I believe these checkpoints have already been eliminated. I think that's one of the things we talked about last week. But
We did discuss it. I'll be sure to confirm what the current practice is, and just to make sure I know, because it would be good to have Chief Hampton's input.
totally. Thank you, Eli. That would be great. And I think that, even if they have already been ceased, I think that there's still value in the fact that, given the information that this group has learned from other sources and other discussions, is that there's reasons behind asking for that, for those not to occur, because things change, and part of the goal is to have some consistency that isn't always dependent on personalities. So there's value in having it there, even if it's already happening.
Yeah, and in the other document, it says that there were 2 that were done, only 2 in 2020. And Chief Hampton had said that they're done to assist other law enforcement agencies like the State Highway Patrol.
Thank you, Allison. All right. Anything else? Okay, great. Thank you so much for all the work and thought that's gone into these. And one question I would have is, I'm gonna stop again and go back to the long version. And my inclination would be that when we're pulling documents together that are going to be forwarded on for others to consider, that both the short and long version go, so that there's a clear understanding of what's behind them. Is that consistent with what group members would like to happen? Have short and long go together? That sound okay? All right, hearing no objection, I think that's what we will move forward with that. Okay, now we can shift gears to Group B. And let's see, Group B. All right, now this is something I haven't done before, so hopefully I won't mess it up. Okay, is that working? Great. All right. Sorry. All right. So Group B I'm going to actually skip the advisory portion right now and move to the use of to the other pieces of Group B's, and then we'll all talk about the advisory stuff together, if that's okay. So I'm going to scroll down to the use of force recommendations. The advisory board should hear community complaints and be able to promptly respond to community members. The police department should be given incentives to cooperate with the advisory board by providing case information, including police reports, ability to interview officers at the scene in question, and body camera footage. The current Hillsborough policy is to store body camera footage for 90 days for incidents that do not end in arrest. A policy should be issued that if a complaint is filed on any incident, the body camera footage should be kept as long as the incident is under review, either internally or by the advisory board. Per general statute, the head of the custodial law enforcement agency can disclose a recording to any person whose voice or image is in the recording. If that person is also the person making the complaint to the advisory board, a policy should be written where the presumption is that disclosure of such recordings will be granted to a person whose image or voice is in that recording. And that person can show the recording to the board without making a copy of the recording, which is prohibited in the statute. They really don't make it easy in the General Assembly. The advisory board would be allowed to advise the person making the complaint on the proper procedure to request the recording. Alternatively, the advisory board shall be granted limited authority to act as the personal representative of the person in the recording. So I'm going to pause on this and bring this piece back up when we move to the advisory board stuff. And there is a note that there's an effort in the state legislature to make all police recordings public record. As an FYI, speaking of the state, the governor did just sign, and I apologize, I actually meant to send this out to the group, but last week the governor did sign some bipartisan criminal justice reform that will keep a database of officers that have, history of complaints, history of, I'm missing the language in my head right now, but any, shootings or other serious injury, officer involved injuries. And there's a couple of, or if they've ever had their license suspended or revoked. and putting all of that in a place so that it can be used in hiring. Because right now it's, as it did before that, it was just very piecemeal, and it was up to each individual departments whether or not they were interested in learning about those incidents and backgrounds. So it will help codify across the state some of those higher standards. Okay, moving back to use of force. The use of force policy is vague. The advisory board must suggest or create clearer policies about when use of force is justified. An issue related to use of force is a show of force. Procedures shall be developed where officers do not need to be in full tactical gear to respond to non-criminal or non-emergency calls. The task force had a community comment about a call for a non-urgent manner for which that citizen had police arrive at his house in full tactical gear, which was quite intimidating. Officers should dress for the type of call to which they are responding. Okay, so let's pause here with the use of force piece. Any comments, additions, or questions about this section? And just remember, I can't see you, so just feel free to speak up, because I've only got 3 on a screen at a time. All right.
One thing is I inserted the tactical gear, and I can't remember if that's actually the language that I can't remember his name, the man who came.
Mr. Mullaney.
Yes, if that's the language he used, or if that's the proper language to get to what we're talking about. I can't even remember if that's what we, I need to look back at our notes in our small group meeting, if that's the language we use, but I mean, it might be helpful to talk about if that gets to what we're talking, try to flesh out what we are saying. Like, I mean, obviously we're saying tactical gear, like, makes me think of like military grade gear. But I think there might be some concern even just about having weaponry for certain calls. So just if anybody has any comments about how to make that clearer or what they would like to see. I don't know if tactical gear is the best language for that recommendation, and would like to get some feedback on that.
Well, I just looked up the definition of tactical, and it just said relating to tactics, especially military or naval tactics. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I think like, I know what you're saying, and I agree that maybe we should double check that term. But I know the thought is that, you know, bulletproof vests and a weapon, not just a taser, but a gun, and that kind of thing. But it's kind of like the full militarized sort of look is what we're talking about. I don't have a better suggestion, but just to respond.
Yeah,
I
thank
don't
you.
know.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's, I think it, using that term put an emphasis on removing some unnecessary equipment. That is, you see what I'm saying? So we cannot go to, we cannot use a term to go, I mean, we cannot use a term at a granular level, saying that, you know, the officer should not have a gun, or, you know, see what I'm saying? So I think that's, I think to me that this term is the proper term, just to eliminate, you know, when you say tactical gear, that's not a regular, you know, like, you know, bulletproof vests and guns. I think that's not tactical gear, right? So if, I mean, what else could be, you see what I'm saying? So what else could be considered as a non-tactical gear? So I don't know. I think to me that's, that's because at the end of the day, the police officer is going to have to protect himself. I mean, himself or herself. So I think that's a proper term. That's my view.
This would be another place where I would offer that it strikes me that what is the most important is what the intent is behind your recommendation, and so and this time I'm making notes here on paper instead of in the document, since in it on the Google Doc, but that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the intent is for there to be some consideration for different types of calls and what type of equipment or weaponry is necessary, and that it's preferable in non-criminal, non-emergency calls for it to be a less intimidating, show of force, as you say up here. Is that a correct description of what's behind this recommendation? Okay.
I think so, because when you say, when we're talking about tactical gear, all my years in the military, when you say full tactical gear, we're grabbing our M16s, we're grabbing our Kevlar, we're grabbing, our vests, we're grabbing everything that we needed to protect ourselves. So I know that there are bulletproof vests that can be worn underneath your clothing that are not bulky, that you wouldn't know that an individual had them on. So, and I know that those are items that police officers can wear that individuals won't know they have on, and they still could have those items on and individuals won't know that they're wearing that bulletproof vest and still have on all the necessary items that they feel they need to have on for their protection without them looking like they're going into combat. So basically, people don't want them to appear as though they're going into a combat zone just to go into someone's neighborhood.
Having said that, if it is unnecessary, well, there are instances where I think you need everything that you can to help you. But I think what this is trying to say is that if it is unnecessary, then why having it, right? So yeah, that's a good point, Pat.
So in the interest of trying to get a place of closure with these recommendations, I would be happy to take a shot at just kind of finessing that language a little bit to, I think, get at what you all have described here. Mainly because you all have done so much work already. And then running that by folks, or would you all prefer to do that yourselves?
I'd be happy to let you do it.
Okay. All right. I'll put that on my to-do list. This feels in line with what it seemed like this group discussed, had a lot of discussions about the importance of, building stronger community relationships between the community and police officers, and that this is a place where, if it's possible to you know, to tone down some of the gear in some situations, that it could help foster that. Okay. All right, scrolling down to procedures. 3A, police officers should be more involved in the community. Establishing policies where officers can attend community events in street clothes, or at least dress down. Officers should have a stand at First Friday. Change that to last Friday, but yes, we get the point. to something like popcorn machine, cheap, and would draw people in, allowing officers to talk to community members. Officers used to go to the community garden in Fairview. This practice could be revived. Fairview Live is another opportunity for officers to attend community-specific events and do outreach to improve relations, and even potentially recruit. And then meetings with various Hillsborough communities should be standard on a quarterly basis. Outreach for these meetings should be a focus for officers. Chief Hampton reported that the annual community summit isn't well attended. Having meetings with specific neighborhoods might increase participation. Other ideas to increase participation in the meetings would be building relationships and trust with communities first is crucial to have police. It is crucial to have police presence at community events and meetings. Connecting with community leaders to act as bridge builders could help develop these relationships. Each community has an office. Officers could post in these offices about community forums or events there so that more people know about what is happening. In general, do more outreach to people that are connected to the communities they are trying to reach. Word of mouth is really one of the best ways of outreach. Connect with leaders in the community. So all of these get deep into that community building and community trust. Any questions or comments about this group? I did have one question, which was just about this one here. Number 2, were you saying that each community should have an office? Like there should be some kind of like location established in different neighborhoods? I wasn't quite sure what this meant, or that there are existing locations.
I think we were talking about existing locations. Patricia, I don't know if you can speak to this. In my memory, you were the one who said this in the meeting, but I may be wrong about that. But do you recall?
Well, I know in Fairview.
Oops, you just muted yourself, Patricia. You muted yourself.
In Fairview community, we have our community watch program. I know Kathleen talks a lot about Gateway community, and some of these communities, they have office buildings and they have community boards, and different things can be posted on the community boards, so that when I know that one particular outreach program that Chief Hampton was talking about, I don't think they gave the public enough notice when he said he didn't have a good turnout, because no one really knew anything about the outreach program he was talking about until the day of the program or either the day before the program. So I think that's what we were talking about. Most of them have some place, even the church, thinking about churches as being the community forums, because churches have bulletin boards, and if you get them into the churches and get them on their bulletin boards, most of the community members will see the events and see what's going on.
Thank you, Patricia. That's really helpful. That totally makes sense. Other questions or comments about this section? Okay. Keep moving down to hiring and training. The advisory board should do exit interviews for officers leaving Hillsborough to be able to independently. Okay, this is going back to the advisory board, so I'm gonna leave those pieces for now. Those involved in recruitment should themselves be diverse. If admin staff needs to be added to the recruitment team in order to achieve a diverse recruitment team, then do that. Potential candidates need to see that people like them are present in the department. We recommend that the salary offer for a Black, Indigenous, or person of color potential candidate be increased to further incentivize strong BIPOC leadership in Hillsborough. We say this knowing that Hillsborough's current rate of compensation is equal to or above compensation in other local jurisdictions. A further increase would demonstrate commitment to hiring diverse staff in leadership roles and put emphasis on the importance of that goal. There's already some racial awareness training for Hillsborough officers. More hours of training on this should be made mandatory. All right, any questions, comments, or additions to this section? Okay. Awesome, y'all. Thank you so much. Everyone has just know a ton of work and thought has gone into these. And thank you. We are getting there. So now I'm going to switch gears again because we can move on to our next item, which is to talk about the vision for recommendations on a standing advisory board. And I want to be sure I have all of these advisory board pieces captured on the other thing that I'm looking at before I switch over. All right, I think I've got those captured. So. All right, real quick, before we launch into this advisory board piece, I just wanted to touch on the town values that the Board of Commissioners adopted this past summer as part of our budget process. These are not markedly different from the values we were already working from, but it just felt like time to kind of rehone them and reword them a little bit so we were clear with what we were doing moving forward, because we are doing this community visioning, comprehensive sustainability plan, and it felt like they needed a refresher given where we are right now. So I'm not going to spend time on these, but I just wanted to read through them because they're a really good framework, I think, for thinking about, how the town board is thinking about our advisory boards and how they should be, how everything we're doing, whether it's the town board, town staff, or our advisory boards, ideally would be working in concert together, holding these same values. So the first one is vibrancy. A vibrant Hillsborough is one that is lively and active, and the activity is visible and frequent. We see this manifest in cultural arts, recreation, and how people know each other and are connected by physical and social networks. The people, physical environment, and business community are core to this vibrant atmosphere. Equity and inclusion. Hillsborough is a place where every resident can thrive, where everyone who works and lives here feels they belong. We will strive to support policies, plans, and actions that are administered fairly to build a Hillsborough where all people of all races, ethnicities, genders, sexes, sexual orientations, abilities, and incomes want to live, can afford to live, and will be treated with dignity and respect. Forward thinking. We think and make decisions that can persist over generations, acknowledging that economic, environmental, and social issues are interrelated. This community has a unique sense of place encapsulated by both Hillsborough's long and treasured history and where it meets change and looks to the future. We have an obligation to be fiscally, environmentally, and culturally wise in order to plan for the long term and be resilient to unforeseen events. We strive to foster a culture of innovation and creativity in town operations. And lastly, public service. The town of Hillsborough is here to serve. We are committed to good and ethical governance. We are responsible stewards of community tax dollars put to use for the public good. We strive to ensure each resident, visitor, business, and employee are safe as they live, work, and play in Hillsborough. And this sense of safety should extend beyond the physical environment to foster a community where the people are free from worry regarding whether who they are has any bearing on how they are treated. And this last piece feels especially relevant to the work that this task force has been doing, and that any future advisory board would be doing as well. And so then I want to go back to what the question that I posed when we first started talking about advisory boards, which is, what is the problem that we are trying to solve? And what helps Hillsborough get closer to living out our values? So this task force, you all come from the community, you are community members, and now having been through this process of meeting together for all of these months, you have a unique perspective on what is needed in the community. It doesn't mean it's perfect, and no one has that. But you do have information and knowledge and experience that you've gained as a group that is really important for moving forward. And so now we just have to decide what is needed. And so it doesn't have to be fully fleshed out, you know, sort of like with the other recommendations, this group doesn't need to decide, you know, how often it will meet, how many people will be on it, you know, all of those things. It doesn't have to be that. It's what is it that is needed? And so I think my first question is this: what is the problem, or what are the problems we are trying to solve? So in the thinking that you did, and you know, I know the second group whose recommendations we looked at tonight, you all you know, put some of these on paper, and we'll get to those. But if I could just hear a little bit from folks about this piece. What are the problems that we're trying to solve that an advisory board can help with?
I'll say that the way that I think we were conceiving of it in our group, the problem we'd be trying to solve is to have a independent kind of third party body that can help review and give further recommendations to the Hillsborough Police Department. And based on what you just said, I'm not sure if the advisory board is actually the right body for that, but we did feel like a body that could play those two roles would be important to have.
I'm sorry, Chloe, could you say that again? Could further review like complaints or policies or both, or?
Yeah, well, a third party that could review complaints, yes, but then also continue to review policies and provide recommendations to the Hillsborough Police Department.
And so would the problem be that this doesn't, currently there's no standing venue for this?
Right.
What else?
I think a problem that we might be trying to solve would be like an and this is not necessarily like getting the fault of the Hillsborough Police Department per se, but a problem that we're trying to solve that we're getting at is a disconnect between community members and police departments writ large, right, in general. And so I think that part of, at least in our small group, the solutions or the recommendations that we have come to have a lot to do with building better relationships between communities and the police department.
Anything else?
I think maybe too, some community members, beyond feeling just a disconnect with the police department, feel maybe over policed, and the issues that they're maybe, I don't know, struggling with as different members of the community, like increased rates of addiction or violence or poverty, aren't being adequately addressed, and in fact are being kind of just responded to by the police in crisis kinds of situations.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, now I can.
I'm not sure. Did everyone lose the meeting?
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm.
Okay. I did, but I adjusted, and I hope to not lose it again.
Right. Sorry about that, Eli. We I don't know what happened. We all remained. We persevered.
Good. I'm glad. Glad to hear it.
I have another thought.
Sure.
That the police are called upon to respond to situations where they don't have the background. It's not their training to address certain circumstances for which they are called. And that was pretty vague, but they've sort of become the go-to 911 call for anything related to safety and even beyond safety.
Just to clarify, I know that we probably all get what it means on disconnect between police departments, but I just wanted to clarify that it's not intra police department, it's police departments and communities.
Thank you, Hooper.
From my perspective, I think there's a need to review data for racial disparities and other issues that the advisory council might be able to pinpoint.
So Sujata, again, at the risk of, I'm really trying not to put words in people's mouths tonight, but would it be okay to say, so the problem is that there are these racial disparities, and that's something that this board could keep paying attention to and thinking about? You know, just
That's
looking.
what I was thinking. I didn't know if we wanted to blatantly state that or not.
Well, you know, I think that we've seen that in the data. You know, it feels, you know, like an unfortunately universal problem in all communities, including our own. You know, in at least the traffic stop data that we've seen.
Yeah, I think that's fair to put.
Is that okay, what I wrote?
Sure.
Okay.
I'd say another problem would be that a lot of responses to those racial disparities are in kind of an experimental stage, because a lot of them are relatively new and being tried out in different jurisdictions. And so just the board then could help evaluate, you know, what training is effective, pay attention to new innovations coming down the pike from different jurisdictions, different thought leaders, and try to make sure that the changes that are being made or recommended are forward-thinking and actually effective.
We need to diversify the police force in order to handle some of these disparities. They need to get more minorities on the force to help handle some of these situations that can be better handled if they had someone, you know, if they had more Latinos on the force. I know they've hired some, but, you know, they're more apt to handle some of the situations that they need a Spanish-speaking person to help, maybe to handle a situation that, you know, if someone could speak the language, they probably could talk down a situation, versus someone not being able to speak the language and just arrest somebody and take them downtown, versus someone who could de-escalate a situation by speaking the language. You know, it's just, you have to have the right people in the right situation sometimes. So we need to diversify that police force a little more.
And your group had some things specific to the advisory board, I believe, that addressed that.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I'm not going to try and type them because y'all already did a great job with that. So I'm just going to, anything else? As far as the advisory board goes?
Can't remember. I was thinking about the use of force and whether they would review that, but I vaguely remember that there's already a group that reviews the use of force.
No, there's no existing group in the town of Hillsborough that does that. Those they are reviewed within the department. Every use of force or display of force is reviewed within the department, but there's no other body that does that.
In that case, I think I would add that.
Okay, and I believe that, so there's some language in that from group B about use of force. Just moving this other stuff up. Just because we're getting into some of the shoulds. Pardon me, I'm just going to copy and paste from, I won't be able to share the screen, but I'm going to copy and paste from from group B's work on this. Oh, it's not going to let me. All right, just 1 minute. All right, I'm floundering here, so I'm just gonna go back to screen sharing. The wrong thing. So sorry. Okay. Are you seeing the Google Doc with group? You're seeing the Google Doc with the use of force recommendations? Is that what people see?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's talk about this a little bit since we're here. So group B talked about several things with the advisory board, saying they imagine that we strongly recommend a standing advisory board and that it be convened, populated, and supported. Imagine a small number of dedicated citizens and community leaders would be ideal. You all even thought about the number. Diversity to us means variety in age, race, ethnicity, experience, and perspective. We imagine that the advisory board would continue to conduct research into police practices and continue to use recommendations to the town board as necessary. Another very important function of the advisory board would be to review community complaints regarding the use of force or about other police conduct. Many police review boards across the country have failed, and many reports show this is due to inadequate authority or because of lack of information. Policy should be adopted to avoid this outcome in Hillsborough. I really liked it that well, I like all of this, but that you all added this piece because I think that will be really important, an important consideration of, this hasn't worked in other places and what, it needs to be thought through carefully about what would work here. So I I apologize. My flipping between documents is a little more awkward than I thought it was going to be. So we've shifted back from trying to identify the problems we're trying to be addressed, which I think that that's a good list. It's a pretty comprehensive list. And then here, moving back to some work that Group B did on specifically on some recommendations for the advisory board. I thought it was important that both groups did come away from your discussions saying you thought that there should be an advisory board, because I do, it was an open question about whether one was needed or not, and both groups said you thought that would be a good thing to have. So, anything to add or change to these A, B, and C here? Questions or comments? Okay. And then moving to the use of force. I'm sorry, Patricia, were you about to say something? Oh, no, okay. So Group B put some thought into how the advisory board could address some of the use of force things we all thought about, asking if the police department could be incentivized to cooperate with the advisory board by, providing helpful information, body camera footage, and some recommendations about what the current policy is about storing that footage, but wanting to be sure that it is kept as long as any incident is under review, or either internally or by the advisory board. And then this language here about the custodial law enforcement being able to review the footage and the rules they have about making copies, et cetera. So this piece, all of this kind of goes together with suggesting that the advisory board has a role to play with reviewing use of force incidents. And I think that that's really kind of the gist of what these are, with some specific parameters that you would like to see. So are there any questions or comments about these? And then also a desire for the advisory board to suggest some clearer policies that might be used about when use of force is justified, because it strikes this group as not specific enough. Anything to add here? Okay, so I'm just trying to scroll back down to the other places where this group addressed the advisory board.
I think it was under hiring. It was the first.
Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. Yes, these first two. So under hiring and training, the advisory board should do exit interviews for officers leaving Hillsborough to be able to independently ascertain the factors that lead officers to leave. Any observations or recommendations should be reported back to the police department. The advisory board should also participate in the hiring process to review methods of interviewing and selecting candidates. And then some questions about how those interviews are currently done. And the advisory board could play a role in strengthening the interview process. Questions, additions about any of these aspects? Okay, I'm going to go back to the other document. Okay. So in this time that I've been talking, so are there any other elements that need to go under this? What is the problem that Hillsborough is trying to solve? Okay. So this is what I propose as far as this advisory board. Well, let me stop. In addition to the recommendations that have been made by Group B that they have shared with us tonight, are there other specific recommendations folks would like to offer for what this board should do?
I just had a comment about the structure
Mhm.
being having open meetings that are available for the public to make input, and also that the meeting minutes are made available to the public, just for transparency purposes.
Yeah, that's the case for all of our advisory boards, but I think it's great to be sure that that's specified.
That makes
And-
me, I'm sorry, go ahead, Allison.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know if this is too much, but I was really interested in the Durham model, their community safety and wellness task force. And I didn't know if we wanted to try to incorporate any of that into this also. I mean, I have it pulled up, their bylaws, and I'll very briefly read their mission is just, is that okay with everybody?
Mhm.
If I read that? It's short. It's a joint community-led task force charged with examining the public safety and wellness needs of Durham residents and communities, educating residents on existing safety and wellness resources, and providing recommendations for additional programs to enhance public safety and wellness that rely on community-based prevention, intervention, and reentry services as alternatives to policing and the criminal legal system. So I know that's like kind of a big different scope. But I think our community is small enough that it might be worthwhile to, I don't know, at least consider.
Is there a link to that you could share in the chat box?
Yes.
I just had a comment about, or kind of a concern that I don't know what the answer would be, but for if all of the meetings of the advisory board, if all the minutes need to be publicly available and then be open to the public, if the advisory board is also going to be investigating complaints made about the Hillsborough Police Department, it seems to pose a problem to me. I'm not sure that during, when they're reviewing materials and trying to come to a decision about whether a complaint was justified or what kind of recommendations they would be passing on to the Hillsborough Police Department. I'm not sure if we want that part of meetings to be open to the public, just because it's really sensitive, and I think that would, if all those discussions were open to the public, I think that would limit the willingness of the police department to work with the advisory board. And two, I think that those discussions would, I don't know, you have to be debating whether something was done, whether it was done correctly or whether it was done poorly, and that like decisions that come out of that that should be open to the public. But I don't know if an advisory board can have smaller meetings that aren't open to the public, or how others feel about that. But or maybe there's just a different body that needs to do investigations into citizen complaints. But that seems to be a problem that I don't really know how to solve.
Yeah, Chloe, I would put that in the bucket of things that this group does not have to try and solve that right now. I think that because this is going to be a real, this is going to be a big thing to wrestle with. It's going to be a really big thing for the next level of decision makers to contend with. This keep using the word bucket, I'm so sorry, but this big bucket of things that that the task force is saying this advisory board could do. So that, I think that is what it is, and that that's just going to have to be part of the conversation moving forward, and that this group doesn't have to discern those pieces. I think because there'll be, I think there'll be all kinds of sort of wait, what about this moments, and that would be one of them. Okay, I'm circling back to what Allison brought up about the community safety and wellness example. Do folks want to add things about this in here? Or Allison, or do you want to suggest something more general about that? As that's elements of that might be good to be incorporated or to work with other jurisdictions on, or.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there's currently kind of a lack of, or a deficit of violence prevention kinds of programs, or trainings in how to build community capacity to address violence within their own communities without calling the police, or without contacting some other entity. Yeah. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Other questions, comments, or additions? Okay, I think that there are the bones. I think the bones are here that can be turned into a narrative for what the task force's intent and desire is for a standing advisory board. And this will be a project for me to write this up in a way that I hope is reflective of what of all the things that have been said here, and then run it by all of you to be sure that it captures all of the things. Is that acceptable? All right.
Would that be something we handle over email?
Yeah, I think we would just handle that over email. Yeah, I really do. I mean, we're getting close to the wrap up, but I really do think that this is our last meeting together, because there's so many things we could keep talking about and refining. But I think it's just we've done the work that we're set out to do, and we can wrap it up and move forward. But that piece, I think we can finalize via email, and of course that will be shared publicly as well. Okay. Then I will move us. Any comments for the moment on advisory board? Okay. So moving to the path forward. So I have I have one big job, which is creating the narrative of the advisory board. And then I can place the recommendations into a coherent form. And Eli, I might need to work with you on that some, but I'm happy to kind of do the main editing of that piece to start with. And then the next step, after we have all the pieces, as folks want them, where the task force feels like they're ready, then those will be sent on to the Hillsborough Board of Commissioners, the town manager, Chief Hampton, and the town attorney for review. There'll be a period of review, probably lots of questions. I can't say for sure exactly what that process will look like, but I know that it will be acted upon in good faith. So that will be the next phase. And so that won't necessarily, I think there'll probably be time for those to be reviewed before they're discussed at a town board meeting. I mean, board members, we won't meet about those, in a non-public meeting, but I'm just sort of giving you an idea of how I think things will unfold. In the report, the elements that I'm thinking need to be in there is that I would write a letter, just kind of talking about the work and meetings over the past time that we've been together. And then we'll list the original purpose and charge of the task force, list of all the members, and list of recommendations. And I had a thing in here about unfinished business, things that we felt like this board didn't discuss that we thought might need more attention. And I had written this weapons and body armor piece, but then group B actually ended up, you all did include some discussion of that. So I'm going to delete that for now. And I think that I believe that probably unfinished business is captured in the advisory board discussion, unless you all have things that are at the forefront of your minds that you think should be in an unfinished business category. All right, seeing shaking of heads. All right, so I'm just going to delete that piece. Is there anything else that needs to go in this report?
Sorry, it's me again. I know it's getting late, but
Great.
I did have one addition, which was a recommendation. Orange County is increasing some deflection and diversion initiatives. And so I had just thought that, I mean, I'm hoping the Hillsborough Police Department will be a partner with that anyway, but just to maybe add that they, what did I say? Support expansion of diversion and deflection efforts underway in Orange County and fully partner with these initiatives. And that's written out in the.
That's in the long version, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I remember seeing that. I'm sorry, I didn't remember to cover that.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that
No, that's great.
that was brought up.
Okay. Well, I'm going to set myself a deadline of having that. I'm going to give myself a week to formulate that other piece and try to get the language clear. And so you all should be seeing that soon. I'm just giving a little bit of time for folks to jump in if there's something else they're suddenly remembering. All right, well, here it is, 8:57. In our 10th meeting, I believe. And I am just feeling extremely grateful for you all rising to the occasion here. It took a lot longer than anticipated. And I think that, you know, with the passage of time, sometimes the urgency of things can feel less urgent, but I just want to iterate that I feel like the urgency of this work has not lessened, you know, in the wake. This task force was part of the commitments that the town board made in the wake of the George Floyd murder and subsequent uprisings in this community and across the country. And it felt really, really important to get moving on our commitments. And this task force is a part of that. And this really is a time of change and opportunity. And I really appreciate having members of our community, all of you being willing to take part in this, because it's very hard, you know, and we are all experts in different things, but not necessarily in really reimagining how to make our community feel safe for every person. So I'm just really appreciative of all that you've done. And with that, I think we can adjourn, and you will hear from me with these documents soon. Oh, I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see everyone. There we go. Sorry about that. I should have done that before. At least see your squares. So thank you again, everyone. And I also, I know he's not here, but a thank you to Chief Hampton for his attentiveness and all of the work that he put into providing this group with information. And thank you, Eli, for all of your support. Deeply appreciated. And I sure do look forward to seeing folks outside of a little television square as we're able. So thanks so much. And I'm loving all these comments in the chat. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, y'all.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.